petty, spiteful act ended up costing them a multi-million-dollar contract. Was it worth it? The HOA thought putting up a fence to block access to the lake on my ranch would make me angry, but I wasn't angry. I simply picked up a pen, and with one signature, everything they built vanished into thin air. They picked the wrong person to mess with the bridge, leading into their luxury villa community. Their crown jewel became nothing more than a stranded block of concrete in the middle of the lake. But that power tripped a chain of events no one saw coming. Within 12 hours, I used her lies to dismantle everything she had built. By sunrise, the HOA had collapsed. And Karen, well, you won't believe where she ended up. How can a single night flip an entire neighborhood upside down? Brace yourself for the most unhinged HOA takedown you've ever heard. Where are you watching this story from? Drop a comment below. I was sipping my morning coffee on the back porch watching the mist rise off Willow Lake like I'd done every day for the past 2 years since Sarah died. The routine had become sacred to me. A quiet moment before the chaos of single parenthood and construction. Deadlines took over. That's when I saw it. A gleaming steel fence, 8 ft tall, stretched across what had been our family's path to the lake for over 50 years. A bright red sign hung on the chain link: private property, no trespassing, by order of Willowbrook OA. My coffee mug hit the wooden deck with a sharp crack. Not because I was angry, though. Any reasonable person would be. Know what struck me was the sheer audacity of it all. Karen Whitmore had waited until I was out of town on a 3-day bridge inspection job to pull this stunt. She'd calculated this moment, probably circled it on her calendar with one of those expensive pens she loved, flashing around at HOA meetings. The woman who lived in the biggest house in Willowbrook Estates, married to real estate mogul Richard Whitmore, had just declared war on a widowed construction engineer and his 8-year-old daughter. Dad Lily's voice came from behind me, small and confused. She was still in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed duck that had been her mother's last gift. Why can't we go feed the ducks every morning since Sarah's funeral? Lily and I had walked down to the water's edge. It wasn't just about the ducks, though, but Lily loved watching them paddle around in their endless circles. It was our ritual, our way of staying connected to Sarah's memory. My wife used to say that water never lies. It always finds its way home. This lake had been the home for 3 generations of Blackwoods. I knelt and pulled Lily close, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Some people think they can take things that don't belong to them, sweetheart, but sometimes they're wrong. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so much like her mother's, and I saw something that made my heart break. A little more today was the anniversary of Sarah's death, and Lily had been planning to throw rose petals into the water just like we did every year. Now that path was blocked by Karen's fence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sitting on my desk, inside was a contract worth $2.3 million, signed and ready to execute the Whitmore Bridge project. They called it a stunning architectural marvel that would span the narrowest part of Willow Lake, connecting the main road directly to the exclusive Whitmore Estates. Karen had personally requested that I handle the engineering, claiming she wanted only the best for their community centerpiece. What she didn't know was that her precious bridge would be built on land that had belonged to my family since 1952. I walked back inside and pulled out the original land deed from my grandfather's files, running my finger along the faded ink of his signature. There it was, clear as day, a special clause that my grandfather had insisted on when he first leased portions of the family land to developers' land. Use rights may be terminated immediately if the lay violates federal or state law. Grandpa Jake had been a smart man, much smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He'd seen what unchecked development could do to family land, and he'd protected us the only way he knew how. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen Mason. I hope you understand this fence is necessary for community safety. The HOA has determined that unrestricted lake access poses a liability risk. If you'd like to discuss purchasing a membership pass for $50,000, please call me. $50,000 for access to water that legally belonged to me? The woman had brass, I'd give her that. But brass and legal authority weren't the same thing, and Karen was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I called her back immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Oh, Mason, I was hoping you'd call. I know this must be difficult, but the HOA board voted unanimously safety first. You understand, I could hear the smugness bleeding through her words. The satisfaction of someone who thought they'd just checkmated an opponent who didn't even know they were playing chess. Karen, I said, keeping my voice level. That fence is on my property. You have no legal right to block access to Willow Lake. There was a pause, then a laugh. That sounded like ice clinking in an expensive glass. Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused. This is HOA land, has been for years. I have the paperwork to prove it. Perhaps you should speak with a lawyer before making wild accusations. The call ended with a click that echoed in my kitchen, like a gunshot I looked at. Lily, who was pressing her face against the window, staring at the fence that separated her from her morning ritual. She'd been so brave these past 2 years, never complaining when I had to travel for work, never asking why Mommy couldn't come to her school plays or soccer games. But this morning I saw her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. That's when I made my decision. I walked over to my desk and picked up the Whitmore Bridge contract, all 47 pages of carefully crafted legal language and technical specifications. Karen thought she could bully a grieving widower hour into submission. She thought her money and her connections and her perfectly manicured HOA authority could steamroll over generations of Blackwood family history. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. I opened my laptop and began typing a message to Elena Vasquez, my old law school friend, who'd become one of the state's top property attorneys. If Karen wanted to play games with paperwork, I'd make sure we were playing by the right rules. But first I had a little research to do. Something about that fence bothered me. Beyond the obvious property violation, the construction was too professional, too expensive for a temporary barrier. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a calculated move, and I needed to understand the full scope of Karen's game plan. As I scrolled through county records online, a dangerous idea began forming in my mind. Karen had miscalculated in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The same arrogance that led her to build that fence might just be the key to her downfall. I glanced once more at the bridge contract, then at my daughter's tear-streaked face, and quietly reached for my pen. Elena called me back within an hour, her voice tight with professional concern. Mason, I've been looking at the county records. You sent me that fence isn't just illegal, it's brazenly fraudulent, according to the 1952 deed. Your family owns everything within 50 ft of the lake's high water mark. Karen Whitmore has no more right to block that access than I do to fence off the White House. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling. But here's where it gets interesting. Someone's been very busy with the filing system downtown. I was sitting in my truck parked at the construction site where we were supposed to break ground on the Whitmore Bridge next week. From here, I could see the entire lake, including the spot where Karen's fence cut across my family's ancestral path like a steel scar. What do you mean? Busy? Elena's laugh had no humor. In it, I mean someone paid off Derek Morrison, the building inspector. I found a deposit for 15 grand in his account, made the same day your fence went up. Morrison's been covering for Karen, making sure no one from the county comes. Sniffing around her little construction project, the pieces were starting to fit together with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about blocking my access to the lake. Karen was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before someone pushed back. She'd probably done this before in other neighborhoods to other families who didn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back. But she'd miscalculated this time. She'd picked a fight with someone who built bridges for a living, someone who understood that the strongest structures are only as good as their foundations. There's more, Elena continued. I pulled the original HOA charter from 1995. Guess what? The association has no legal authority to restrict access to privately owned waterfront. Never did. Every single rule Karen's been enforcing about lake access is legally meaningless. She's been running a 20-year con game, and nobody bothered to check the fine print. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. 20 years of families being bullied of property rights, being trampled, all because one woman, with too much time and money, decided she wanted to play queen of the neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Chen, my lead foreman boss. Got a problem. A lady from the HOA just showed up with some suit, says they're here to inspect the bridge site for code violations. Thought you should know. I looked across the lake at the Whitmore mansion, its glass walls gleaming in the afternoon. Son Karen wasn't waiting for me to make the next move. She was escalating, trying to destroy my livelihood before I could. Challenge her authority. I called Tommy back immediately. Don't let them touch anything. That inspection isn't official. It's harassment. Tell them they need proper county authorization. And if they don't have it, they're trespassing on a federal construction site. Through the phone, I could hear Tommy's relieved chuckle. Copy that, boss. They don't look too happy, but they're backing off. Elena's voice came back on the line. Sharp with Discovery, Mason, I need you to sit down for this one. I've been digging deeper into Karen's background, and she's got a pattern. 3 different states, same playbook. In Georgia, she convinced a county clerk to lose property deeds so she could claim adverse possession of waterfront land. In Colorado, she bribed a tax assessor to reclassify private land as HOA property. In Texas, she used forged signatures to transfer lake access rights to her association. She's not just corrupt, she's a serial property thief. The scope of Karen's operation was staggering. This wasn't about power or respect or even money. Not really. This was about a woman who had found a system she could exploit, and she'd been refining her methods for years. How many families had lost their heritage to her? Schemes how many kids like Lily had been cut off from places that held their most precious memories, but Elena had saved the best for last. Here's the kicker, Mason. That bridge contract you're working on, I found the land use agreement from 2014. Your grandfather leased the construction site to Richard Whitmore for the bridge project with one very specific clause. This agreement may be terminated immediately if the lie or their agents engage in corruption, fraud, or other illegal activities in violation of federal or state law. My heart started. Company called Whitmore Community Solutions. But it was Karen's social media activity that opened my eyes to her mindset. While publicly she maintained the facade of a concerned community leader, her private posts in exclusive HOA Facebook groups told a different story. She bragged about dealing with problem residents and shared strategies for creative property acquisition. In one particularly damning thread from 6 months ago, she'd written, "These small-town families don't understand property law. A few official-looking documents and some bureaucratic pressure, and they fold like cheap lawn chairs." The arrogance was breathtaking, but it was also her weakness. Karen had documented her crimes, believing she was among friends who shared her predatory worldview. Elena and I spent hours screenshotting conversations, building a digital paper trail that would make any prosecutor's job easy. But I wasn't ready to involve prosecutors yet. First, I wanted to understand exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. That's when I made the discovery that changed everything. While reviewing old property transactions in the county database, I found something that made me call Elena immediately. "You need to see this," I told her, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and excitement. Karen didn't just steal from my family. She's been systematically targeting every waterfront property owner in the county for the past 5 years, and I know why Elena met me at the county courthouse within the hour. Her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and her game face on. Together, we pulled every property deed, every land use agreement, every zoning variance that had been filed in Willowbrook County since 2018. The pattern that emerged was stunning in its scope and audacity. Karen hadn't been stealing random pieces of land. She'd been assembling a massive waterfront development, project piece by piece, family by family. "Look at this map," Elena said, spreading out a large printout on the courthouse table. She'd color-coded every property transaction, and the result looked like a jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces already in place. She's been acquiring lake access rights from 12 different families, always using the same playbook. Fake HOA authority bribed inspectors, forged documents. But she's not keeping the land for herself. She's been quietly transferring everything to a development company called Lakeside Luxury Estates. I stared at the map, feeling pieces of larger conspiracy clicking into place. Lakeside Luxury Estates. That sounds familiar? Elena nodded grimly. It should. It's owned by Richard Whitmore's business partner, Senator Bradley Morrison. My blood went cold. Morrison, as in Derek Morrison, the building inspector. Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Derek is Senator Morrison's nephew. Karen's been using family connections to corrupt the inspection process, while assembling land for a massive development deal that would make her husband and his political allies tens of millions of dollars. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just about HOA power trips or CC disputes. Karen and Richard had been running a systematic land grab operation designed to clear out existing families and make way for luxury waterfront development. The bridge project I'd been hired to build wasn't just a convenience for current residents, it was infrastructure for a planned community of million-dollar lakeses that would be built on stolen land. But Elena had saved the most important discovery for last. Mason, remember that lease agreement your grandfather signed with Richard in 2014? I found something interesting in the fine print. Your grandfather was smarter than anyone realized. He didn't just lease the land for the bridge, he retained mineral and water rights for the entire lake shore. And here's the kicker. If Richard's development company tries to build anything else on lake-adjacent property, they need your family's explicit permission. I felt a dangerous smile spreading across my face. So Karen's been stealing land for a development project that can't legally proceed without my approval. Elena nodded. And since she's violated the original lease agreement through fraud and corruption, you have grounds to terminate not just the bridge contract, but any future development, right? You could essentially shut down their entire operation with a single signature. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by boxes of evidence that detailed Karen's crimes. Tomorrow, I will start the next phase of my counterattack. But first, I had one more piece of research to do. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Willowbrook community Facebook page where Karen had been steadily building public support for her version of events. Her latest post shared just 2 hours. Ego showed a picture of my family's fence with the caption, "Concerned about the escalating property dispute with a resident who refuses to respect HOA authority. We must protect our community values and property standards." The comments were predictably supportive, with neighbors expressing concern about problem residents and applauding Karen's leadership. But I noticed something interesting about the engagement pattern. Several of the most vocal supporters had profiles that seemed fake, with recent creation dates and very few personal photo. Karen wasn't just manipulating property records, she was manipulating social media to create the illusion of community support. I closed the laptop and walked out to the back porch, looking across the water toward the Whitmore mansion. The lights were on in what I assumed was Richard's home office, probably working late on development. Plans that would never see the light of day. Karen thought she was playing a sophisticated game of political and financial chess, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed her opponents didn't know the rules. Tomorrow, I will start teaching her just how wrong she was about that. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. What started as a routine HOA meeting had turned into something resembling a town hall debate with over 200 residents packed into a space designed for 50. Karen had called this emergency session after my troubling behavior escalated, and she'd spent the week before rallying support through her network of allies and fake social media accounts, but she'd made a critical error in judgment. She'd assumed I would show up unprepared and intimidated. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase that Elena had helped me organize the night before. Inside were printed copies of bank records, property deeds, communication, transcripts, and photographic evidence that would dismantle Karen's carefully constructed facade piece by piece. But more importantly, I had a small digital recorder and a portable projector. Karen wanted a public confrontation, and I was going to give her exactly what she asked. For Karen took the podium wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Her opening statement was a masterclass in manipulation, delivered with the polish of someone who'd been perfecting this performance for years. Friends and neighbors, we're here tonight because our community is under attack. For weeks, Mason Blackwood has been harassing HOA officials, making wild accusations and refusing to respect the property rights that protect all of us. Tonight, I'm going to present evidence that Mr. Blackwood has violated no fewer than 15 community standards, and I'm asking for your support in removing him from our neighborhood. The presentation that followed was impressive in its thoroughness and completely fabricated in its content. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint slideshow complete with property maps, legal citations, and photographs. that supposedly showed my violations of community standards. She accused me of operating an unlicensed business from my home, storing hazardous construction, materials in violation of zoning laws, and intimidating community officials through aggressive communication. The crowd murmured and nodded as she spoke, clearly swayed by her authoritative presentation style. But Karen's confidence was about to become her downfall when she opened the floor. For questions, I stood up slowly, setting my briefcase on the floor beside me. Karen, thank you for such a detailed presentation. I have just one question. When you mentioned my aggressive communication with community officials, were you referring to the conversation where you admitted to falsifying property documents? The room went dead silent. Karen's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. But she recovered quickly. Mr. Blackwood, I have no idea what you're talking about. Perhaps you're confused about the content of our conversations. That's when I pulled out the digital recorder and set it on the table in front of me. Then maybe this will refresh your memory. I pressed play, and Karen's voice filled the community center with crystal clarity. Those farming families don't understand property law anyway. A few official-looking documents and some bureaucratic pressure, and they fold like cheap lawn chairs. Derek's been very helpful with the inspection reports. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Conversations erupted throughout the crowd as people began connecting dots they'd previously ignored. Karen's face had gone pale, but she wasn't ready to concede defeat. That recording is taken completely out of context. Mr. Blackwood is trying to manipulate you with edited audio, but I was just getting started. I connected my laptop to the projector and began displaying the evidence Elena and I had compiled. Bank records show payments to Derek Morrison, property deeds with forged signatures, screenshots of Karen's social media posts bragging about her methods, and finally the development maps showing the planned lakeside luxury estates project that would have displaced dozens of families. With each new piece of evidence, the crowd's mood shifted further away from Karen and towards something that looked like anger. The breakthrough moment came when I displayed a photograph that one of Tommy's workers had taken 3 days earlier. It showed Karen meeting with Derek Morrison behind the community center, handing him an envelope. The timestamp on the photo was just hours after Derek had filed a fraudulent inspection report claiming my bridge construction site violated safety protocols. This is Derek Morrison, our county building inspector, receiving what appears to be payment for services rendered. Services that included falsifying inspection reports and ignoring illegal construction. Karen finally lost her composure. This is a witch hunt. Mason Blackwood is a vindictive man who can't accept that his family's time in this community is over. He's using lies and manipulation to try to destroy good people who are just trying to protect our neighborhood. But her voice had risen to a near shout, and the desperation was obvious to everyone in the room. That's when Richard Whitmore entered the building, his arrival causing a stir throughout the crowd. Richard was a man who commanded respect in this community, not just because of his wealth, but because of his reputation for fair dealing in business. What nobody expected was the announcement he made as he walked to the front of the room. I owe this community an apology. Over the past 72 hours, I've discovered that my wife has been conducting illegal activities in my name and using my business relationships to cover her crimes, effective immediately. I'm filing for divorce and cooperating fully with law enforcement in their investigation of Karen's activities. The room erupted in chaos. Karen's carefully assembled coalition of supporters began looking around nervously, clearly reassessing their positions. Several people who had been nodding along with her presentation were now studying their phones, probably deleting social media posts that endorsed her version of events. But Karen herself seemed to shrink into herself, the powerful community leader, facade crumbling to reveal someone who looked small and desperate. I remained standing throughout the commotion, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, I delivered the statement I'd been preparing for weeks. Karen Whitmore spent months trying to convince this community that I was the problem. She used forged documents, bribed officials, and manipulated social media to paint me as a troublemaker who wouldn't respect community authority. But the truth is, she's been running a criminal enterprise designed to steal property from families, like mine, and transfer it to development companies owned by her husband's political allies. I paused, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Tomorrow morning, I'm delivering all of this evidence to the county prosecutors. Officer Karen Whitmore will face justice for her crimes. But tonight I want to make one thing clear. That fence blocking access to Willow Lake comes down, or there will be consequences that extend far beyond this neighborhood. Karen's world began unraveling at precisely 6:47 a.m. The next morning when 3 black SUVs pulled into the Willowbrook Estates driveway. Federal agents, not local police. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit had been monitoring Derek Morrison for months as part of a broader investigation into municipal bribery schemes, and Karen's recorded confession had given them everything they needed to move forward. I watched from my kitchen window as agents in Navy windbreakers carried boxes of evidence out of the Whitmore mansion, Karen's voice from the night before still echoing in my mind. This is a witch hunt, but Karen wasn't finished. Even facing federal charges, she had one more card to play, and she played it with the desperate cunning of someone who had spent decades manipulating systems to her advantage. By noon, work crews had arrived at my bridge construction site with official-looking paperwork claiming the project had been suspended pending a comprehensive safety review. The foreman, a nervous man in an ill-fitting suit, handed Tommy a cease and desist order signed by Deputy Inspector Michael Crawford. "Boss, they're shutting us down," Tommy called me, his voice tight with frustration. "We violate 17 different safety codes, operating without proper permits and storing hazardous materials in a wetland preservation zone. They want everyone off the site by the end of business today." I stared at the bridge supports we'd spent weeks installing, thinking about the 15 families who depended on this project for their livelihoods. Karen had just cost me $3 million and put my crew out of work, all with a phone call to another corrupted official. The timing was no coincidence. While federal agents were raiding her house, Karen had been on the phone with Michael Crawford, Derek Morrison's replacement in the building inspection office. Crawford was either another member of her network or someone who could be quickly bought. Either way, he just weaponized the inspection process to destroy my business in retaliation for exposing Karen's crimes. It was a brilliant move in its twisted way. Even if she went to prison, she'd make sure I paid the price for challenging her authority. Elena arrived at the construction site within the hour, her expression grim as she reviewed Crawford's paperwork. "This is all fabricated," she said, flipping through pages of alleged violations. "Half of these codes don't even apply to bridge construction, and the others are so vague they could be used to shut down any project. But here's the problem. Fighting this through official channels could take months, and your crew can't wait that long." She was right. Tommy and his team had families to feed, and I couldn't ask them to wait indefinitely while lawyers sorted through Karen's latest round of sabotage. That afternoon brought Karen's final assault. A black sedan pulled into my driveway, and 2 men in expensive suits introduced themselves as investigators from the Internal Revenue Service. They had received an anonymous tip claiming I had been underreporting income from land lease agreements and operating an unlicensed consulting business from my home. The timing was surgical, designed to destroy my reputation and my finances simultaneously. While I was defending against tax fraud allegations, I wouldn't be able to pursue criminal charges against Karen or fight the construction shutdown. But Karen had made a crucial miscalculation. While she'd been focused on destroying my current projects, she'd forgotten about the foundation of her empire. That evening, Elena and I met at her law office to review something I discovered buried in my grandfather's file. "Look at this," I said, spreading out a collection of documents that dated back to 2014. When Richard first approached my grandfather about leasing land for development, Grandpa Jake didn't just lease the bridge site. He leased 3 separate parcels totaling almost 50 acres. Elena's eyes widened as she studied the property. "Maps Mason. This shows that the entire Whitmore Mansion complex is built on your family's land. The main house, the guest houses, the private marina, all of it." She grabbed her laptop and began cross-referencing the lease agreements with current property records. "And look at this clause in the original agreement. This lease may be terminated immediately if the lay or their agents engage in corruption, fraud, or violations of federal or state law." The scope of what I discovered was staggering. Karen hadn't just tried to steal my lake access. She'd been living on stolen land for almost a decade. The Whitmore empire, worth an estimated $50 million, was built entirely on property that belonged to my family, and thanks to Karen's criminal activities, I had legal grounds to terminate every single lease agreement. With 3 signatures, I could essentially erase the Whitmore. Development from existence. There's more? Elena continued, her voice filled with excitement. Richard's development company has been using these leases as collateral for massive construction loan. If you terminate the agreements lakeside, Luxury Estates goes into immediate default on approximately $40 million in debt. The entire operation collapses overnight. She paused, looking up from her laptop. Karen just handed you the nuclear option. I drove home that evening with my mind racing through possibilities. Karen had spent the day trying to destroy my life through bureaucratic warfare, but she'd given me the power to destroy hers. With a few pen strokes, the irony was almost poetic. She'd used corrupted officials and fraudulent documents to steal from families for years, and now her own crimes had made it possible for me to reclaim everything she'd taken. But as I tucked Lily into bed that night, I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice for every family Karen had victimized, every community she'd manipulated, every official she'd corrupted. Tomorrow I will use the nuclear option. But first I needed to document everything to make sure that when Karen's empire collapsed, it would take down her entire network of accomplices with it. I sat in my home office until well past midnight, preparing the termination notices that would end 3 lease agreements and destroy a $50 million development project. Karen thought she could use the system against me, but she'd forgotten that the system only works when it's built on legitimate foundations. Her foundation had always been fraudulent, and tomorrow I would prove that houses built on lies eventually collapse under their weight. The clock on my desk read 11:47 p.m. when I finally positioned the 3 lease termination documents in front of me. Each contract represented a different piece of the Whitmore empire. The main residential complex worth $32 million, the commercial marina development valued at $12 million, and the planned luxury estate expansion that would have been worth another $6 million. $50 million in real estate built on my family's land through a decade of lies and corruption could be erased with 3 signatures. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my grandfather's fountain pen, the same one he'd used to sign the original lease agreements back when he still believed Richard Whitmore was an honest businessman. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent months trying to steal a small piece of waterfront access, never realizing that her husband's entire empire rested on land that could be reclaimed the moment she violated the lease term and violate them. She had spectacularly and repeatedly creating a paper trail of federal crimes that made the termination clause ironclad. I thought about Lily sleeping peacefully upstairs, clutching her stuffed duck, and dreaming of feeding real ducks by the lake tomorrow morning. For 2 years, we'd been blocked from that simple ritual, first by grief and now by Karen's fence. But tonight I would remove both barriers. The grief would always be there, but the fence and everything it represented would be gone by sunrise. Sarah used to say that water always finds its way home, and tomorrow our family's water would flow freely again. 11:55 p.m. I signed the first document terminating the residential lease, the Whitmore Mansion with its floor-to-ceiling windows and Italian marble facades was now legally classified as an unauthorized structure on private property. 11:57 p.m. The second signature eliminated the marina development stranding. Richard's Yacht Club in legal limbo. 11:59 p.m. The final signature canceled the luxury expansion project, leaving Lakeside Luxury Estates with $40 million in debt and no assets to cover it. At exactly midnight, I called Elena's emergency line. "It's done," I said simply. "All 3 leases are terminated, effective immediately. Karen's criminal activities have voided every agreement between our family." Elena's voice was sharp with excitement. "Mason, do you understand what you've just accomplished? When the sheriff's department serves those notices in the morning, the entire Whitmore development becomes legally uninhabitable. They'll have 72 hours to remove all personal property before the county starts seizure proceedings." But I wasn't finished while Elena began the process of filing emergency motions with the county courthouse. I had one more call to make. Detective Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had left her card with me after Karen's arrest, asking me to contact her if I discovered any additional evidence of federal crimes. Tonight I had something better than evidence. I had justice served on a silver platter. "Detective Martinez, this is Mason Blackwood. I have something you need to see within 20 minutes. She was sitting in my kitchen, reviewing copies of the terminated lease agreements, and the evidence that had made them possible. Mr. Blackwood, what you've done here is going to be studied in law schools for decades. You've essentially used property law to dismantle an entire criminal organization. When word of this gets out, every corrupted official in Karen's network is going to panic and start looking for plea deals. The first sign that my plan was working came at 5:30 a.m., when my phone rang with a call from Richard Whitmore. His voice was with desperation and what sounded like genuine fear. "Mason, please, we need to talk. I know." Karen crossed lines that should never have been crossed, and I'm prepared to make this right. The divorce papers are already filed, and I'm cooperating fully with federal investigators, but please don't destroy everything we've built. Think about the families who work for my company, the investors who trusted us. I let him finish his plea before responding with the words, "I'd been rehearsing all night, Richard. Your wife spent months trying to steal my family's heritage. She bribed officials, forged documents, and manipulated our community to cover her crimes. The everything you built was constructed on stolen land using criminal methods. Today, that debt comes due." The line went quiet for a long moment before Richard whispered, "How long do we have?" I looked out my kitchen window toward the lake, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear. 72 hours at exactly 6 a.m. 3 sheriff's deputies arrived at the Whitmore mansion to serve the eviction notices. I had positioned myself on my back porch with a clear view of the proceedings, and what I witnessed was the complete collapse of Karen's carefully constructed world. She emerged from the front door in a silk bathrobe, her perfectly styled hair disheveled, and her face showing the strain of a sleepless night spent trying to find lawyers willing to take her case. "You can't do this!" she screamed at the deputies, her voice carrying across the water with crystal clarity. "This is my home, I have rights," but the lead deputy was unmoved, professional in his delivery of devastating news. "Ma'am, these properties have been determined to violate lease agreements dating back to 2014. You have 72 hours to remove all personal belongings. Any items remaining after that time will be considered abandoned property and subject to county seizure." The scene that followed was both pathetic and satisfying. Karen, the woman who had terrorized neighborhood families for years with her bureaucratic bullying, was reduced to pleading with county officials, while news crews that had been tipped off by Elena documented every moment. The local television stations led with the story, "Federal investigation leads to $50 million property seizure by noon." CNN was running segments about the case, calling it a perfect example of how property law could be used to combat municipal corruption. But the most satisfying moment came when I walked down to the lake with Lily for the first time in months. The fence was gone, removed by court order. As part of the property restoration process, Lily ran ahead of me to the water's edge, pulling breadcrumbs from her pocket to feed the ducks that had been waiting patiently for her return. As she scattered the crumbs across the calm surface, I pulled out my phone and started a Facebook live stream that would eventually reach over 200,000 viewers. "Good morning, everyone. For those who've been following the Willowbrook property dispute, I wanted to show you something beautiful." I turned the camera toward Lily, who was giggling as ducks paddled eagerly toward her. "This is what justice looks like. Not revenge, not anger. Just a little girl getting to feed ducks on her family's land." The comments section exploded with support, with viewers from around the world sharing their own stories of standing up to corrupt officials and predatory HOAs. Karen's empire had fallen not through violence or dramatic confrontation, but through the patient application of legal principles and documented evidence. Her arrogance had been her downfall, her crimes had been her undoing, and her victims had finally found their voice. As I watched Lily throw rose petals into the water in memory of her mother, I knew that Sarah would have been proud of how we'd fought this battle with intelligence and integrity rather than anger and revenge. 6 months later, I stood in the same county courthouse where Elena and I had first uncovered Karen's crimes, watching as federal judge Patricia Monroe delivered the final sentences in what had become known as the Willowbrook corruption case. Karen Whitmore, once the undisputed queen of our neighborhood, sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly manicured facade replaced by the hollow stare of someone whose entire world had crumbled. 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and embezzlement. Derek Morrison got 5 years. Michael Crawford received 3 years in permanent disbarment from public service. The scope of Karen's criminal enterprise had shocked even seasoned federal prosecutor. The investigation that started with offense blocking lake access had uncovered a network spanning 4 states involving dozens of corrupted officials and totaling over $8 million in stolen property and fraudulent development deals, Senator Bradley. Morrison had resigned in disgrace when his connection to the scheme became public, taking down a political career that had spanned 3 decades. The ripple effects were still spreading through municipal governments across the region, as prosecutors followed every lead Elena and I had provided. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Monroe announced the restitution awards. The court finds that the defendants' criminal activities directly resulted in substantial financial harm to multiple victims. Karen Whitmore is hereby ordered to pay restitution for $1.22 million to Mason Blackwood, representing lost business income, legal fees, and compensation for property rights violations. The number was symbolic more than anything else. Karen had no assets left to pay it, but hearing it spoken aloud in federal court validated everything our family had endured. Richard Whitmore had managed to avoid criminal charges by cooperating fully with investigators and providing evidence against his estranged wife, but his business empire hadn't survived the scandal. Lakeside Luxury Estates had collapsed within weeks of the lease terminations, taking down $40 million in investor funds and leaving dozens of planned developments in legal limbo. Richard himself had fled to the Cayman Islands, where he was reportedly working as a real estate consultant under an assumed name, a far cry from the billionaire developer who had once respect throughout the state. The transformation of our community had been even more dramatic than the legal proceedings. The old Willowbrook HOA had dissolved completely, its authority structure discredited beyond repair. In its place, we'd formed the Willow Lake Community Association with myself as the elected president and a charter that explicitly prohibited the kinds of arbitrary rulemaking that had enabled Karen's abuse of power. Our first official act had been to establish the Sarah Blackwood Memorial Fund, providing legal assistance to families facing HOA harassment anywhere in the county. Elena had helped us draft new community guidelines that made sense, focusing on genuine safety concerns and environmental protection rather than petty aesthetic control. Property values had initially dropped when news of the corruption scandal broke, but they'd rebounded stronger than ever as word spread about our reformed governance structure. Young families were moving to Willowbrook specifically because they wanted to live in a community that had proven it could stand up to bullies and protect individual rights. The physical transformation of the neighborhood was equally striking. The Whitmore Mansion complex had been demolished by court order, and the land returned to its natural state as protected wetland habitat. Where Karen's steel fence had once blocked access to the lake, we'd planted a community garden, maintained by local families. The old marina had been converted into a public boat launch and fishing pier open to anyone who wanted to enjoy the water that had been locked away for so long. But the most meaningful change was the bridge. Using the settlement money from various lawsuits and a generous donation from an anonymous benefactor, who turned out to be Richard's former business partner seeking to make amends, we'd completed the Willowbrook Bridge project with a new design that honored both function and memory. The Sarah Blackwood Memorial Bridge spanned the narrowest part of Willow Lake, connecting our community to the county park system and providing access for families who had been excluded from the waterfront for decades. The bridge dedication ceremony had drawn over 500 people, including state legislators who wanted to be associated with our community's success story. But the moment that meant the most to me was when Lily cut the ribbon using the same scissors her mother had used for her last school art project. As cars began crossing the bridge for the first time, I could almost hear Sarah's voice on the wind. Water always finds its way home, Tommy. Chen and his crew had not only gotten their jobs back, but had been hired as the permanent maintenance team for all county bridge projects, their reputation enhanced by their association with our successful fight against corruption. Several of the workers had started their own companies inspired by the example of standing up to powerful interests and winning through persistence and integrity on quiet evenings. Lily and I still walked down to the lake to feed the ducks and throw rose petals on the water. But now we were often joined by other families, children who had never known the fear of HOA harassment, parents who felt secure in their property rights and their community voice. The lake that had once been a symbol of exclusion and stolen heritage had become a gathering place for people who understood that the best communities are built on trust rather than control. As I wrote this story 6 months after Karen's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Elena's law office. It was from Karen writing from federal prison asking for forgiveness and claiming she'd found religion behind bars. The letter was 3 pages of self-serving justification mixed with what might have been genuine remorse, but I didn't finish reading it. Some bridges are meant to be burned and some fences are meant to stay down. Instead, I walked out to my back porch and looked across Willow Lake toward the Sarah Blackwood Memorial Bridge, where evening joggers were crossing in both directions and kids were fishing from the pedestrian walkways. A gentle breeze carried the sound of laughter across the water, and for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should be. Water had found its way home, justice had been served. And our community had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can topple the mightiest. Empires built on lies. The greatest victories come not from fighting harder, but from fighting smarter. Mason's journey shows us that when we're pushed to our breaking point, we have a choice. We can let injustice define us, or we can use our pain as fuel to protect others from the same fate. The fence that was meant to divide became the catalyst that united an entire community. We all face our own Karen Whiters in life. Those who abuse power and prey on the vulnerable. Have you ever stood up to someone who thought they were untouchable? What gave you the courage to fight back? Your story could be the inspiration someone else desperately needs to hear. If this reminded you that justice is still possible in our world, thanks for watching. This is AH Stories. Stay connected for more thrilling tales and unforgettable moments.